my crazy quarantine class. It's hard to believe that we are drafting and getting close to the end of this fiction writing unit. Um, Today we're going to be talking about writing powerful endings. And when I say powerful, I mean powerful. We've already talked about how important it is to hook that reader. Well, now we don't want to disappoint that reader at the end. Whether you've hooked them in with that awesome introduction, the beginning of the story that you started with, and they've read through your story, you got lots of action, and everyone, the reader knows what's going on with the main character, where they're at, and there's no confusion. But the last thing you want to do is let that reader down at the end of your story. There's been a lot of times when I've read books by professional authors where they've hooked me in. I've read that book, I get to the ending, and I'm like, no, that wasn't what I was looking for. And I'm sure some of you have felt that way. So we want to try to avoid that with our own stories. And I've given you a couple of things that you can do to make sure that you have that powerful ending that we're looking for. All right. Um, First thing we want to do kind of goes in with our last lesson about flow and making sure that the reader knows what's going on with the character and where they are. Writers craft endings making sure they mesh and serve the purposes of their stories. That's a fun word there, mesh. All mesh basically means is that everything fits together in your story, okay? You should be talking about one thing, that problem, how the problem gets worse, and then how it gets resolved. And you shouldn't go away from that at all. You can't throw in any surprises that aren't related to that problem. For example, let's say you're writing a story about someone who can't find their keys, okay? And it's important now because they're late for work. So it's not the fact that they're just missing their keys. The problem gets worse by being late for work. Well, you can't throw in another thing where they completely forgot to do a report that was due for work. You can't throw that in there. We want to make sure that everything makes sense. We want to focus on one problem, want to focus on that one problem getting worse, and focus on how that problem is resolved. And that ties in perfectly with the powerful endings. Now, there's a couple of different things you can do to make sure that you have a great, quality, powerful ending at the end of your story. Can the reader see evidence of the main character's evolution? Ooh, I love that word, evolution. It's just a fancy word of saying how the character has changed. So, your character may be worried or concerned or upset because of the problem, and then getting a little bit more worried or concerned or upset because the problem got worse. But then did it change once your problem was resolved? We should see some type of change from your character. So make sure that as you're wrapping up your story at the end, that your character has gone through some kind of change. We've been talking a lot about that in reading as well, about how characters are never one thing. They're never always happy, they're never always sad. They change just like all of you do. So make sure that a reader can see evidence of that in your story. The second thing is kind of related to that first bullet point. Does my ending make sense or does it come out of nowhere? And if it comes out of nowhere, it's probably not a good thing because as your reader is reading your story, they kind of know what to expect. And it's okay if something unexpected happens, but for something to come completely out of nowhere, that's not a good thing. So make sure that your ending makes sense. You don't want your reader going, wait, who is that person? Or wait, what just happened at the end of your story? Because that means we didn't make it a powerful ending. The third thing on here, whoops, look at that, I misspelled that. Are there loose ends? Are the loose ends tied up? Oh, no, I didn't. There you go. Are the loose ends tied up? Have I answered key questions the reader might have? And you can see how this one and this one may be related. If you're going to come out of nowhere with something, that means that there is a loose end that isn't tied up. Or now, instead of answering all those questions the reader might have, now they're going to have even more questions. All right. And we're not writing a whole series of books like a Harry Potter or a Percy Jackson. You're just writing one story. So I shouldn't see any to be continued or that's the end or is it. We want to wrap these things up. Okay. We want to make sure that everything the reader has been reading and the questions that they might have that they've all been answered. All right. And if you have a character that's got a problem and the problem gets worse, you want to make sure that that problem is resolved in your story. You don't want any what we call loose ends. That means that things that aren't finished up. We want to have everything wrapped up by the end of our story. And the last one, have I revealed everything I need to for the story's purposes? Okay. Now, as all of you know, I'm writing my story. It's a realistic, but it's still fiction because there's things I'm going to throw in there that weren't necessarily true, namely the characters' names. But imagine if I had the hook that I had, where I told the reader that Timothy was thinking long and hard about how to get revenge on Lynn, his sister, and then he finally came up with it. And I talked about everything that Tim had been thinking about how he was going to do it. And then I just ended my story before it happened. That would fit into the are there loose ends tied up? Does the reader have questions? And that would also fill into this one. I haven't revealed everything I need to for the story's purposes. When I wrote the beginning of my story, I said Tim finally came up with an idea of how he could get his revenge, right? And if I'm ending the story at the very top of the driveway with the garbage can out and my sister not in it, well, I haven't revealed anything I needed for that story's purposes. And I haven't tied up any loose ends. And my story doesn't make any sense. And the reader can't see evidence of the main characters changing. So pay really close attention today to those endings that you have come up with. Make sure that you're wrapping everything up that you've brought up within your story. Don't add anything new. No to be continueds. No the end, dot, 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 or is it? We're not writing a series of stories here. We're just writing one story. So we need to make sure that everything ends powerfully and that everything meshes together. Okay? So think about that as you reread your story and you look at your ending. I'm sure some of you will have to make some changes, which is totally great, and it's what writing is all about. Some of you may need to make a lot of changes. Some of you may need to make a few changes. But I definitely expect some changes, seeing some changes in your draft for your powerful ending. All right? So make those endings powerful. Make sure they make sense. Don't have anything coming out of nowhere. And good luck.